This is one of those questions that sounds almost too obvious to ask until you actually start digging into the specifics. And then it turns into one of the most genuinely fascinating rabbit holes in human history. Imagine standing at the entrance of a cave, all sea winds howling around you as you prepare to step inside. It's 20,000 years ago, during the last ice age, and inside this cave, ancient humans are huddled together around a hearth, relying on some of the most ingenious survival strategies ever devised. So, how did ancient humans survive the brutal conditions of the Ice Age? And why do these methods reveal such consistent patterns across different human populations? Let's actually dig into this. First up is something called nutritional opportunism, or more technically, adaptive foraging. This concept revolves around the idea that Ice Age humans weren't just passive consumers of whatever happened to be around. They actively adapted their diets to the environment's changing offerings. For example, remains found in the Gravettian culture sites in Europe, dating back around 25,000 years, show evidence of mammoth specialization, with a staggering 70% of protein sources coming from these massive creatures. This adaptation wasn't just about preference, it was a survival necessity, as mammoths provided not just meat, but fat and hides essential for enduring cold climates. Another fascinating case shows up in the Arctic Circle. The Thurul people, ancestors of the modern Inuit, have been documented as relying heavily on marine mammals, such as seals, which constituted up to 80% of their diet. This wasn't just about nutrition. Seals provided the fat needed to fuel the human body in extreme cold, as well as waterproof skins, perfect for clothing. Now this sounds like it completely contradicts everything we just said. After all, specialization seems risky if a species goes extinct. However, the resilience came from their ability to pivot, employing a diverse suite of species when any one resource dwindled. This reveals a sophisticated understanding of ecosystems and long-term planning, often not attributed to ancient societies. So ancient humans weren't just surviving, they were mastering their environments. How does the environment itself shape these survival strategies? This brings us to microclimatic engineering, sometimes referred to as controlled habitat modification. This concept highlights the role of creating microenvironments to buffer against the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. Pile dwellings in the Swiss Alps, dating to around 4,000 years ago, demonstrate early forms of temperature control and insulation, raising living areas above the cold ground and using layers of moss, earth, and animal skins as insulation. A similar innovation is seen in the remains of stone walls found in glacial Europe, specifically around the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, from approximately 30,000 years ago. These acted as windbreaks, protecting communities from the relentless winter winds and preserving heat from fires. This sounds contradictory when we consider the nomadic nature of many Ice Age peoples. How can you settle in one place long enough to build? But the key here is that these structures were often temporary, built and abandoned as needed, yet embodying a deep understanding of resources and construction methods. So these methods were not static, but adaptable to the constantly shifting climates. What about the role of clothing and technology in survival? Let's explore thermal innovation, which is the development of clothing technologies that maximized heat retention. We see this in the archaeological finds from the site of Sungir, Russia, dated to about 30,000 years ago. There, intricately decorated clothing with beads was unearthed, suggesting not only functionality, but social and cultural significance that could indicate status or group identity. Another compelling example is the use of tailored clothing among the prehistoric populations of Siberia. Evidence shows that by 20,000 years ago, these groups were using bone needles to sew fur garments, a practice that increased the insulating properties of clothing by 40% compared to untailored pelts. But what about those who couldn't access such resources? Interestingly, the Ibanag people from the Philippines, despite living in a tropical climate, utilized bark cloth, adapting readily available resources to create insulation, albeit to a lesser extent. This shows that while technology was an enabler, necessity drove innovation across vastly differing environments. Thus, technological advances in clothing weren't just about survival. They were about efficiency and adapting to available materials. How did communication and social structures fit into this icy puzzle? Next, we delve into what we could call cognitive mapping, or the mental technology of landscape navigation. This concept describes how ancient humans developed sophisticated mental maps that allowed them to traverse vast, featureless ice landscapes without getting lost, a skill crucial for survival and resource acquisition. Archaeological evidence from northern Scandinavia shows that as early as 10,000 years ago, groups were able to migrate seasonally between coastal and inland areas, utilizing mental mapping to find consistent routes over 400 kilometers long. In a different context, Australian Aboriginal groups have used songlines for tens of thousands of years, a form of oral navigation that encodes geographic information into stories and songs, covering distances of up to 500 kilometers. These knowledge systems provided a reliable way to pass down navigation expertise through generations. What complicates this picture is the occasional failure of these systems, such as when environmental changes rendered old pathways unusable. However, these challenges often led to the development of more adaptable cognitive strategies, incorporating new environmental signs and social exchanges to refine their mental maps. Thus, cognitive mapping was not just about route finding. It was about continuous learning and adaptation. What other psychological tools did humans develop to endure the Ice Age's relentless challenges? Finally, there's the concept of social resourcefulness, sometimes called cooperative survival networks. This is where humans took community collaboration to the next level, using it as a cornerstone of Ice Age survival. Take the cooperative hunting strategies of the Magdalenian culture in Western Europe, who around 17,000 years ago organized large groups to drive reindeer into narrow valleys for efficient mass capture, a practice that required high levels of communication and trust. Further south, in what is now southern France, the same culture developed intricate social networks that enabled the swapping of resources and information across distances of up to 200 kilometers. This exchange wasn't limited to goods. It included ideas and survival strategies, a precursor to trade as we understand it today. But what about smaller, isolated groups that couldn't rely on such networks? Interestingly, archaeological evidence from the indigenous peoples of Tasmania shows that they maintained extensive kinship ties, which allowed them to survive harsh climates despite their isolation. These ties often governed access to resources and were crucial in ensuring group survival. This cooperation wasn't just a strategic alliance. It was embedded in the culture and social fabric. So as you picture those ancient humans in their caves, remember their story is one of ingenuity and resilience, driven by a remarkable ability to adapt. And it's these lessons from the past that continue to echo across the millennia, shaping our understanding of human survival even today.